She just needed coins for milk, until his daughter whispered, "I like her better than all the ladies." The evening wind dragged itself across Dry Creek like an old dog searching for scraps. Dust rose in pale veils, wrapping the town in a haze that blurred the edges of buildings and stung the eyes of those who dared look too long into it. The main street lay quiet, save for the groan of the saloon's porch boards and the lonely cry of a coyote echoing from the hills. At the center of town stood the well, its stones blackened with age, its bucket rope frayed from years of use. There, kneeling in the failing light, was a woman. Her dress, once blue, now dulled to gray, clung to her frame like a rag. Her boots, cracked and split at the soles, revealed skin blistered from too much walking. She held a tin cup, dented and bent, pressing it against her lips after the bucket scraped its way up from the dark belly of the well. She sipped, not greedily, but with the care of someone who had learned to measure survival in drops. Then, with a trembling hand, she tipped her last coins into the grocer's waiting palm and received a pail of milk in exchange. Whispers stirred. "She's back again," a woman muttered, tugging her child closer. "Drifter," another voice hissed. "Maybe worse." The sheriff leaned against a post, spitting tobacco into the dust. His eyes narrowed, the brim of his hat shadowing a face carved by boredom and disdain. "She won't last the winter," he said flatly, and the words carried, scattering across the boardwalk like dry seeds on barren soil. The woman, Eliza, kept her gaze low. Hollow eyes, ringed with fatigue, stared into the pail she clutched to her chest. Her hair, once full, now hung in loose, tangled strands, caught by the restless wind. To those around her, she was a shadow, something to step past. But to herself, she was still breathing, and that meant she had not yet surrendered. A group of children lingered, staring at her with the boldness of youth. One boy whispered, and the others laughed, until a mother hissed them quiet and dragged them away. Their footsteps faded, leaving only the sigh of wind and the creak of swinging saloon doors. And then, light, not the sun's light, but the clear, steady gaze of a child. A small hand tugged at Eliza's torn skirt. She looked down to find a girl no older than 7, hair the color of wheat, eyes bright as the spring sky that had long abandoned these plains. The child tilted her head, and, in a whisper that carried like thunder, said, "I like her better than all the ladies." Silence followed. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. Eliza froze, clutching the pail tighter. The words, simple and pure, cut deeper than any judgment flung her way. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She could only stare at the child who had offered her something she had not felt in years: acceptance, raw and unfiltered. The townsfolk shifted uneasily. Some turned away, muttering. Others stared harder, as though trying to peel away whatever spell the child had cast. But the girl didn't notice their stares. She only smiled, her small fingers gripping Eliza's skirt as if it were the most natural thing in the world. From the shadows of the blacksmith shop, a man stepped forward. Jonas Hart, tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who had once stood among soldiers. His face carried scars, not only of battle but of years spent holding grief at bay. His left hand bore the stiffness of an old wound. His right held the calm weight of authority. He was known in Dry Creek as a man who rarely spoke, but was always heard. He looked at Eliza, not with pity, not with the disdain of the others, but with something heavier. A quiet recognition, as if he saw not just the ragged woman kneeling by the well, but the storms she had walked through to arrive here. Their eyes met. Hers darted away, unable to withstand the weight of his gaze. She bowed her head, clutching the milk tighter, as though it were both shield and salvation. Jonas placed a steady hand on the girl's shoulder. Clara, his daughter. She looked up at him with an innocence that time had not yet managed to break. He said nothing, but his silence was filled with unspoken meaning, the kind that stirred curiosity and unease in equal measure. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, chewing harder on his tobacco. The mothers pulled their children farther away. A drunk stumbled out of the saloon, muttering nonsense before collapsing back into his shadowed corner. Above, a hawk wheeled in lazy circles, its cry tearing through the dusk. It circled once, twice, before vanishing into the deepening dark. Eliza rose slowly, every movement heavy with exhaustion. She lifted the pail of milk and turned to leave the well behind, the child's words echoing in her mind. Words so tender they frightened her. Clara lingered, reluctant to let go of her skirt, until Jonas gently guided her away. His eyes followed Eliza as she walked, the dust swallowing her figure step by step. The town exhaled, the moment passing like a ripple on water. But something had shifted, something quiet and dangerous. Above them, clouds gathered on the horizon, thick and bruised. With storm. The air smelled of rain that would never come. A storm was coming, yes, but not of rain. Of men. Of sins left buried in the earth, clawing their way back to life. And at its heart stood a woman with hollow eyes, a scarred rancher, and a child who whispered truths that cut deeper than knives. The Hart Ranch sat on the far edge of Dry Creek, where the land rolled into low hills, and the grass bent always eastward, as if bowing to some unseen master. Its fences leaned in places, weathered boards patched and nailed over older scars. The barn roof sagged, and the fields lay more brown than green. But the house itself stood tall. White paint faded to gray, windows clear but watchful, like eyes that had seen too much. Jonas Hart led Eliza up the worn path, Clara skipping a few steps ahead, clutching the hem of Eliza's skirt as though afraid the woman might vanish if she let go. Outside, the air smelled of smoke, leather, and the faint sweetness of apples kept in a crate by the window. A rocking chair rested by the fire, unmoving yet heavy with memory. Its wooden arms bore the shine of long use, though no one had sat in it for years. Eliza's gaze lingered on it, sensing the absence it represented, the echo of a woman who once filled this house with warmth. Jonas noticed her stare but said nothing. Instead, he set bread, beans, and salted pork upon the table. "Eat," he said simply, his voice rough as gravel, and then stepped back into the shadows near the hearth. Eliza obeyed. She ate with the quiet desperation of someone unused to plenty, though she forced herself not to devour. Her hands trembled around the spoon, not from hunger alone, but from the strange weight of being offered food without demand. In the days that followed, she remained. What began as a meal stretched into chores, then into a rhythm. She swept the wood floors, patched Jonas's shirts, and showed Clara how to shape letters with a stub of pencil. Her hands, though scarred, were deft with a needle, steady with a broom. Yet shadows clung to her. Rope scars circled her wrists like bracelets forged in cruelty. Loud sounds made her flinch, the slamming of a barn door, the crack of firewood splitting. At night, when the house lay silent and the crickets sang, she muttered names in her sleep, fragments of voices swallowed by fire and blood. Jonas heard them. His room was across the hall, door left ajar so he could rise if Clara called in the night. From that distance, he caught Eliza's whispers, the broken cadence of loss. He never asked her about them. But in the morning, his gaze lingered on her longer, eyes softened by something he didn't speak. Clara, untouched by such heaviness, adored her. She followed Eliza like a shadow in sunlight, tugging at her hands, demanding stories, nestling in her lap by the fire. Once, without thought, Clara pressed her cheek to Eliza's chest and murmured, "Mama." The word fell like a stone in still. Water. Eliza froze, her arms suspended in midair. Jonas, seated across the room, lifted his head. His jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable. But he said nothing. Eliza, after a breath that felt stolen, lowered her hand to Clara's hair, stroking it once. She whispered so softly it was almost a prayer. "Sleep, little one. Peace." Fragile as spun glass, held for a time. Days turned, golden with routine. The sound of Clara's laughter drifting through the fields, the creak of Eliza's needle pulling thread, the steady rhythm of Jonas chopping wood. But peace in the west was always brittle. At dusk, A rider appeared, the sun, bled itself out along the horizon as the man rode up the dirt road, dust trailing his horse like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. He swung down from the saddle with the ease of someone who'd spent too much of his life in the saddle. His grin was thin, sharp, a blade drawn halfway from its sheath. "Evenin'," he said, voice slick as oil. "Name's Boone. Lookin' for a woman. Dark hair, lean frame, eyes like she's seen ghosts. Heard she passed through here." Jonas stood on the porch, rifle leaning against the wall beside him. His face remained stone, though his hand rested lightly on the stock. No, such woman here. Boone's eyes scanned the yard, the barn, the windows, the faint curtain movement where Clara peeked out. His smile widened, though it carried no warmth. Funny thing about women like her. They're worth coin, dead or alive, depending on who's paying. Heard she's guilty of theft. Other sins, too. Jonas didn't flinch. His silence was steady, like the weight of a mountain. Finally, he spat into the dust, the gesture sharp. "Best ride on. You won't find her here." The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed. He studied Jonas a moment longer, measuring something in him, then spat back, missing his own boots by an inch. "Ain't the last time I'll be riding through. Men like me got long memories." He swung into the saddle, turned his horse, and rode into the deepening dusk. Dust swallowed him, but the echo of his grin lingered in the air like the smell of rot. Inside, Eliza stood frozen near the hearth, hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles blanched. Her breath came shallow, fast. Jonas entered, boots heavy on the wooden floor. He stared at her, eyes hard, though not cruel. He knelt by the fire, stirring the embers with a poker until sparks leapt like fireflies. The glow painted his scarred face in hues of orange and shadow. His voice, when it came, was low and jagged. "Men will come. More of 'em. You need to decide if you're running or fighting." The fire snapped, sparks spiraling upward, like tiny stars swallowed by the dark chimney. Eliza's lips parted, but no words came. Only silence, heavy with the weight of choice. The Hart Ranch carried silence like armor. Every creak of the boards, every groan of the barn door, every crow that lifted from the fence post felt sharpened, watched. Jonas moved through it like a sentinel, eyes scanning horizons, rifle always within reach. Eliza felt the weight of it too. The stillness was no longer peace. It was the breath before thunder. Jonas placed a pistol in her hands one morning, its steel cold and heavy against her skin. They stood behind the barn, the air damp with dew, chickens scratching the dirt nearby as if unaware of danger. "Hold it like you mean to live," Jonas said. Her fingers fumbled against the worn grip. She raised it, arms trembling. The gun seemed to grow heavier with each heartbeat. She aimed at a painted barrel Jonas had set against the fence. Her shot cracked through the morning air, echoing into the hills. The bullet bit into the dirt, nowhere near the target. She lowered the pistol, shame burning her cheeks. Jonas took it, his hands rough yet steady. He didn't scold. He simply loaded it again and placed it back in her palms. Try again. Her breath came shallow. She steadied herself. The second shot struck wood, splinters flying, though far from the painted mark. Jonas nodded once. Her hands still shook, but her resolve no longer broke under their trembling. Day after day, she trained. She learned the weight of bullets, the kick of recoil, the smell of powder burning in the breeze. She missed more than she struck, but each miss carved a path to something harder inside her, something that refused to yield. Clara watched, sometimes giggling at her poor aim, sometimes clapping when she chipped the paint. Her laughter, pure and unbroken, softened what might otherwise have been unbearable. But laughter dies quick on the plains. It was morning when it came. Clara chased butterflies through the tall grass, her laughter carrying on the wind like bells. Eliza stood at the porch, a smile tugging faintly at her lips, a smile she had forgotten how to wear. Jonas leaned against the post, arms folded, watching the child bound through the meadow. Then, gunfire split the sky. The sound cracked like God's own whip, tearing the air, scattering the birds in a frenzy of wings. Clara froze mid-step, eyes, wide before shrieking and running back toward the house. Two riders crested the rise, dust spiraling behind them. Rifles gleamed in the sun. Their faces bore the easy cruelty of men who had chased down prey too often. Jonas moved without thought. He seized Eliza by the arm, shoving her behind the porch rail, then leapt down into the dirt, rifle already raised. The first bullet screamed past his head, splintering the fence post. He returned fire, the blast roaring like thunder, smoke curling. Into the morning air, Clara's scream split the chaos as she stumbled, falling to her knees in the grass. Jonas ran, body a shield. A bullet tore past, grazing his arm. Blood burst in a hot spray, painting the dust red. He staggered but did not fall, his teeth bared, his rifle barking in answer. Eliza's breath fractured. She crawled toward Clara, dragging her under the porch rail. The child sobbed, clutching Eliza's torn dress, her little hands trembling. Another shot cracked. Jonas's rifle fell to the ground. He clutched his bleeding arm, stumbling backward, eyes locked on the rider aiming straight at his chest. Eliza's heart hammered. The world narrowed to that single sight. Jonas exposed, the rider raising his weapon, time collapsing into a single, shattering moment. A rifle lay in the dirt, dropped by Jonas. Eliza's hand closed around it. The wood was rough, the steel burning cold. Her arms shook as she raised it, the world blurring at the edges, her breath loud as a drumbeat in her ears. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, smoke belched. The rider jerked back in the saddle, his chest blooming red. He toppled, body thudding into the dust. His horse bolted, reins trailing like broken wings. Silence fell. Only Clara's sobs filled the air, raw and unrelenting. Jonas lowered himself to one knee, clutching his bleeding arm, staring at Eliza. She stared down at the rifle in her hands, fingers stiff. Horror trembled through her. Yet tangled in it was something darker. Power. She had killed a man. She had stopped death in its stride. The weapon felt alive, vibrating against her palm even as smoke curled skyward. Her breath came ragged. The word before it left her lips. Jonas's gaze met hers. No praise, no condemnation, just truth, heavy as the desert sky. Now they know you're not prey anymore. The second rider fled, dust clouding the horizon as he spurred his horse away. Jonas watched him vanish, his jaw clenched against pain, before turning his eyes back to the fallen man. Eliza, still shaking, forced herself to look. His body sprawled in the dirt, face slack, lips parted, flies already gathered at the wound that had ended him. Jonas bent, retrieving the leather satchel slung across the man's back. He dropped it onto the porch table, blood dripping from his fingers. Inside lay papers, creased and dirt-stained. Eliza reached for them, though her hand faltered. She unfolded one, her name scrawled in heavy ink across the top. Wanted, for theft, for escape, for sins she had carried in silence. Her breath. Caught. The weight of it pressed down like a stone. Jonas's eyes flicked from the paper to her face. He didn't ask. Not yet. But the question lived in the silence between them, burning hotter than the wound in his arm. What sin do you carry, woman? And can I bear it? The wind stirred, lifting dust around the dead man's body. The smell of gunpowder lingered, sharp and bitter. The ranch, once silent, now carried blood in its dust. The night broke open with thunder. Clouds rolled heavy across the plains, swollen and bruised with rain. The wind bent the grass flat, rattled the shutters, and whistled through the gaps in the ranch's old boards. Lightning split the horizon in jagged veins of white, followed by the slow, bone-deep rumble of the storm. Eliza stood on the porch, her dress plastered to her body by sheets of rain. Water ran down her face, tangled her hair, seeped into her boots until her toes ached with cold. She didn't move, couldn't. Her arms clutched the porch rail as though letting go would send her into the dark, endless plains. Behind her, the ranch was lit faintly by firelight. She could hear Clara's laughter fading into dreams, could see Jonas's shadow past the window. But out here, Under the storm, Eliza's ghosts pressed close, whispering through the rain. She had carried silence like a cloak, but now it smothered her. The papers Jonas had found, the bounty inked with her name, had torn open what she had buried. Her voice broke into the storm. I was a farmer's wife. The words quivered like a child's. She gripped the rail tighter, knuckles bone white. Jonas stepped into the doorway, the light behind him framing his broad shoulders, his face etched in hard lines by the storm's fury. He didn't speak. He only listened, the thunder filling the silence between them. Eliza lifted her face to the rain, letting it wash her tears until no one could tell the difference. Soldiers came. She whispered, voice raw, almost lost in the wind. They took everything, burned the house, took the stock, took... Her breath caught, chest heaving, took more than I'll ever name. Lightning seared the sky. Jonas's face, lit in a flash, was grim, carved from stone. I ran, Eliza said. I stole bread to keep from dying, just bread. But the man who owned that land, a baron, he wanted me. When I refused him, he called me thief, sent men after me, paid coin to put my name on paper, to make me pray. Her voice cracked, splintered by years of running. She pressed her forehead to the wet rail. I've lived like a ghost, Jonas, running from men who see me as coin, not flesh. I don't even know if I belong to myself anymore. The storm answered with another crash of thunder. Rain poured harder, drumming against the roof, splashing into the dirt until it turned to mud. Jonas stepped closer, boots heavy on the wet boards. He said nothing at first. He simply stood in the rain, water coursing down his weathered face, scars glowing pale under the storm's flicker. When he finally spoke, his voice was gravel, low but certain. I don't love skin. Eliza raised her head, eyes wide, searching. His shadowed face. He took another step, closing the distance between them. His hand brushed hers on the rail, rough knuckles grazing her trembling fingers. Lightning flashed, illuminating the truth in his eyes, raw and unguarded. I love what breathes under it, he said. The words struck harder than thunder. For a moment, Eliza forgot the rain, the cold, the bounty, the years of running. Her trembling stilled. Not because the storm was gone, it raged fiercer than ever, but because for the first time, she no longer faced it alone. Her lips parted, breath shallow, as his hand rested lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. Couldn't. That touch, small as it was, anchored her more than any chain had ever bound her. Inside the house, a candle flickered against rain-streaked glass. Behind it, Clara watched with wide eyes, her doll clutched to her chest. She whispered into the cloth ear, soft and certain, Mama's not sad anymore. The storm roared on, wind screaming across the plains, lightning shattering the night in endless bursts. Yet on that porch, beneath its fury, two broken lives brushed against something dangerous. Hope. Jonas's eyes held hers, steady as the mountains. Eliza's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the wild, fragile pulse of beginning. But storms never lasted without leaving wreckage. Beyond the hills, unseen in the dark, hooves pounded. Men rode with rifles strapped to saddles, their faces set, their pockets fattened by promises of gold. Dawn would not bring peace. It would bring vengeance, riding hard across the desert, seeking the woman who had defied their master's claim. And this time, they would not come as two riders. They would come as many. The sun rose red over Dry Creek, a swollen orb dragging itself above the horizon as if reluctant to witness the day. Its light spread across the plains, painting the grass in hues of fire, gilding the Hart Ranch in a glow. Too cruel for what was coming. Eliza felt it before she heard it. The ground trembled faintly, the boards of the porch quivering under her bare feet. She stepped out into the cool morning air, her dress clinging damp from the storm's memory. The horizon boiled with dust. Riders, 6 of them, black silhouettes against the rising sun, rifles glinting. At their head rode the land baron, a man broad as a bull, his coat lined with silver buttons, his voice already booming across the valley. "Hand over the thief," he thundered, the words rolling like a decree from some dark god. "Do it, and we'll leave your land standing. Defy me, and you'll be buried beneath it." Jonah stepped out from the barn, rifle slung across his arm, jaw set in a line hard as iron. He carried the stance of a soldier, scarred by war, but unwilling to bow again. "This land already buried one wife," he growled, voice low but carrying. "And it won't bury another." The Baron's laughter cracked like a whip. He raised his hand. Rifles lifted in unison. Then the world split apart. Gunfire erupted, shattering the dawn. Horses screamed, hooves pounding as the riders charged. Bullets tore splinters from the gate, shattered glass from the windows, churned the earth into clouds of dust. Smoke hung thick, acrid, choking. Jonas fired, the rifle bucking against his shoulder, each shot a thunderclap. One rider fell, tumbling headfirst into the dirt, his body kicking up dust as his horse fled wild. Another screamed as Jonas's bullet struck his leg, the sound ragged, cut short by the chaos. Eliza moved beside him. Her hands no longer trembled. Her eyes blazed with something fierce, something unbroken. She raised the pistol Jonas had drilled into her palms, and her shot found the chest of a man riding hard for the porch. He toppled backward, boots slipping from the stirrups, his hat flying into the dust like a broken bird. In the cellar beneath the kitchen, Clara curled with her doll, hands folded in prayer. Her whispers floated in the dark. "Don't let Mama and Papa die. Don't let them die." The battle raged. Bullets ricocheted off the stone well, wood splintered, horses reared and fell screaming. Jonas's arm bled fresh, the bandage from yesterday already soaked, but he fought as if pain was a thing belonging to another man. Then the Baron's voice cut through the fire and smoke. "She's mine." Eliza turned. The barn loomed behind. Her, its doors gaping like the maw of some beast. He stood there, towering in the shadows, rifle cast aside, eyes gleaming with hunger and hate. "Eliza!" Jonas shouted, but the chaos swallowed his words. The Baron stepped into the dim barn. Eliza backed away, breath shallow, the smell of hay and smoke thick in her throat. He stalked closer, boots heavy on the boards. "You were made for me," he hissed, his words slick as venom. "You'll crawl back one way or another. I'll break you till you remember who owns you." She tried to raise her pistol, but his hand came down, striking it from her grip. The crack of bone against wood echoed, pain flashing through her wrist. She staggered, crashing against a beam. Blood trickled from her lip, but she rose again, trembling with fury rather than fear. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her close, breath foul, eyes glinting. "Ghosts don't choose their fate, girl. Men like me do." Something in her broke. No, not broke, but hardened. Her hand fell upon the haft of a pitchfork leaning against the hay. In a single motion born of desperation and fire, she drove it forward. The tines sank deep into his chest. His eyes widened, breath shuddering out in a ragged gasp. He staggered back, hands clutching at the wood, blood pouring dark and hot. With a final guttural cry, he collapsed, dragging the pitchfork down with him, his body still at last upon the barn floor. Eliza's chest heaved, her arms trembling. But she did not fall. She stood over him, drenched in blood and rain. Not prey, not ghost. Alive. Outside, the gunfire slowed. The last of the Baron's men fled, spurred into the horizon, leaving their dead behind. The ranch fell into silence, broken only by the distant whinny of panicked horses and the settling groan of wood and smoke. Jonas leaned against the gate, breath ragged, blood streaming down his side where a bullet had grazed deep. His rifle hung, limp in his hand, strength waning but spirit unyielding. Eliza stumbled to him, her dress torn, her arms streaked with blood that was not hers alone. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing trembling hands to the wound in his side, her tears mingling with the dust and blood. "Don't leave me," she whispered, voice breaking, raw with everything she had never dared to hope. Her hands pressed harder, desperate. "Not after I've finally been found." Jonas's eyes, heavy-lidded, found hers. Even through the haze of pain, they carried the weight of truth. The storm had passed, but the battlefield lay all around them. Bodies. In the dirt, smoke curling from the barn's broken beams. Life and death tangled in the dust. But here, in the blood and fire, something fragile and indestructible had taken root. The days that followed bled together like water soaking into thirsty earth. Smoke still curled from the barn's broken ribs, and bloodstains lingered dark in the dust. But the Hart Ranch still stood, scarred, but unbroken. Jonas moved slowly through the house, his side bound tight, his steps uneven. The war had left him with scars, but this fight had carved new ones. Yet each morning, when he woke to Clara's laughter echoing in the kitchen and Eliza's soft voice teaching her letters, something inside him eased, like a wound finally beginning to knit. Word spread through Dry Creek quicker than wildfire. 6 riders gone to dust. The land baron himself buried by his own cruelty. A drifter woman who stood with a rancher and lived. So when the church bell tolled on Sunday, the town gathered. They came not just for prayer, but for judgment. Curiosity burned in every eye. Whispers snaked through the crowd. She's the thief. She killed men. She's trouble. Others countered. She stood against him. She fought. Eliza came with Clara at her side, both dressed in Sunday best borrowed from trunks long untouched. Clara's little hand clung proudly to hers, as though afraid the town might try to pull them apart. Jonas walked a pace behind, leaning heavy on his cane, his bandaged side stiff under his coat. The preacher, gray and stooped, stood at the steps of the church. His eyes flicked to Jonas, then to Eliza, and uncertainty shadowed his face. The crowd hushed, waiting for words that did not come. But it wasn't the preacher who broke the silence. It was Clara. Her child's voice rose clear and sharp, piercing the heavy air. "She's my mama now." Gasps rippled like wind over wheat. Clara's chin lifted, her small shoulders squaring with defiance far greater than her years. God sent her when ours went away. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. The words hung there heavier than any sermon. Eliza's throat tightened. She felt every eye upon her. Felt the weight of judgment she had carried like chains for so long. Yet Clara's hand squeezed hers tighter, anchoring her. Jonas stepped forward, limping, his boots crunching on the gravel. His face was pale from pain, but his voice was steady. Gravel worn smooth by truth. "She was never sent for me," he said, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd. "She was sent for the child." He turned, his hand finding Eliza's with rough tenderness, holding it for all to see. His scarred fingers curled around hers, binding them before men and heaven alike. "But somehow," he finished, his voice dropping low, raw, unguarded, "she saved us both." A hush deeper than silence followed. For once, Dry Creek had no jeers, no curses, no spit hitting the dust. Just faces softening, eyes lowering, whispers shifting like winter giving way to spring. One by one, the crowd began to nod. A widow at the edge wiped her eyes. A ranch hand touched the brim of his hat in quiet respect. The preacher, still hesitant, finally bowed his head, not in judgment, but in blessing unspoken. The Hart Ranch was no longer whispered about in scandal. It became something else, a place where ruin had come, and yet life still grew. As the sun climbed higher, the townsfolk drifted away, their voices softened, their steps less harsh. Jonas stood tall despite his limp, Eliza's hand in his. Clara nestled between them, her smile wide as the plains themselves. The wind carried the last smoke of battle across the horizon, thinning into nothing. Overhead, a hawk circled once, wings wide, free beneath the vast, endless sky. Eliza lifted her face to the light. For the first time in years, she did not feel hunted. She did not feel broken. She felt home. And in that quiet moment, standing between a scarred rancher and a fearless child, Eliza Hart, once ghost, once prey, smiled. Not the fleeting smile of survival, but the deep, certain smile of a woman who had finally been found. The plains stretched wide, the wind sang soft, and the story of the angel Mama the Lord had sent would be told for years to come.